I found a post-it note in my late husband's toolbox that said, "Don't trust our son with your signature." That note saved me from losing my condo and led to me owning a recording studio where my son now scrubs mixing boards wearing a shirt that says "Off-Key Liar." I did not see this coming, not in a million years, because for 28 years I was a dental hygienist who could spot a hairline fracture from across the room, but failed to see the cracks opening up in my own family. My name is Joanna Hart. I'm 54, and my professional superpower was staring at tooth surfaces under a fiber optic light for 8 hours a day. I could tell you the difference between a demineralized patch and actual decay before the dentist even leaned in. After I retired early at 50, I handled the books for my husband David's general contracting business, Hearthstone Builders. I learned to read lien waivers, draw schedules, and AIA payment applications the way some women learn to read their grown children's text messages. David and I paid off our 3-bedroom condo in Scottsdale 7 years ago, right before he turned 60. It was a stucco and terracotta unit with a view of the McDowell Mountains, nothing flashy, but it was ours free and clear. I remember the day we got the final payoff letter from the lender. David grilled flank steak on the patio, and we sat there watching the sunset, and he said, "Now the ground under us can't be pulled out from under our feet." David died 3 months ago. Massive myocardial infarction while he was unloading 2x4s at a job site in Fountain Hills. The foreman said he was laughing about something, then his knees buckled. David was the quiet architect of our whole life, a man who triple-sealed every foundation and never missed a chance to double-check a load-bearing calculation. Our son Kyle was the one structure David couldn't fortify. Kyle always had this golden aura about him. He was the kid who sold the most candy bars for the school fundraiser and convinced his 8th-grade science teacher to let him run a music production internship during study hall. At 27, he turned that charisma into a recording studio called Echo Chamber Studios, set up in a converted industrial bay on the south side of Tempe. He wanted top-end gear, a vintage Neve console, 2 Universal Audio 1176 compressors, a matched pair of Neumann U87 microphones, the works. The price tag for the equipment loan was $180,000 through a specialized equipment finance division of Desert Financial Bank. Kyle had no collateral of his own, no real estate, no savings. So I co-signed the loan, pledging our paid-off condo as additional collateral, in exchange for a signed 25% ownership stake in Echo Chamber Studios, LLC. David insisted on a notarized operating agreement addendum, and I kept a copy in a fireproof box. The loan was structured as a secured business note with a personal guarantee, recorded as a deed of trust on the condo, junior only to the zero balance we already carried. The interest rate was 6.7% fixed over 7 years, monthly payments of $2,800 and change. I made sure every document was notarized by a mobile notary who came to our kitchen table. I'd only set foot in the studio once, on opening night, to hear a local indie band called Paper Lanterns record a demo. The bass rattled the control room window, and Kyle hugged me with tears in his eyes. That was 5 years ago. The morning after David's memorial service, before I'd even sorted the condolence cards into a nice basket, Kyle and his wife Tanya pulled into my driveway in a new pearl-white Cadillac Escalade. It had paper plates and that new car smell you can taste. Tanya is an image consultant, which is a fancy way of saying she charges other women $400 an hour to tell them which handbag makes them look less tacky. She walked into my home wearing a dove-gray cashmere wrap dress, gold bracelets clinking, and immediately started rearranging my throw pillows, as if grief were a staging problem she could solve with better lighting. Kyle hugged me and said, "Mom, we're here to take care of everything." I remember the strangest detail. The diamond stud in his left ear was missing its back, and it wobbled when he tilted his head. My dental hygienist brain latched onto that tiny instability. I saw it and thought, that's going to fall out and he's going to lose it. That's how my mind works. I see small things that other people miss. They followed me around the house for an hour, pointing out things they thought I should donate, questioning whether I could handle the stairs alone with my aging knees. Tanya opened the pantry and made a comment about sodium content. At one point, they went into David's workshop, a converted space off the garage that still smelled like sawdust and copper pipe and the faint tang of soldering flux. I saw Kyle pick up a small wooden toolbox, one David had built when we first got married. It was just a pine box with finger joints and a brass hasp, the kind of thing you'd keep odds and ends in, a few chisels, a stray washer, a stubby pencil. Kyle turned it over in his hands, scoffed, and said, "This is just a box of junk. We'll toss it." He set it near the garage door with a pile of cardboard marked for the dump. Tanya wrinkled her nose and said something about the dust aggravating her allergies. I nodded, said nothing, and waited until they left to handle some paperwork at the studio. Then I retrieved that box as quietly as I'd ever picked up anything in my life. That night, alone in the condo with the air conditioner humming, I opened it. Inside were old receipts, a few carpenter pencils sharpened to perfect points, a cracked measuring tape, and a black leather-bound pocket notebook I'd never seen before. The leather was soft and worn at the edges, the kind of notebook David would keep in his back pocket on site. It smelled like him, a mixture of pencil graphite and that herbal hand salve he used for his calluses. I flipped through it slowly, as if each page were delicate. Pages of job notes, lumber orders, phone numbers for subcontractors, quick sketches of crown molding profiles. Then, on the very last page, in David's familiar blocky handwriting, these words: "Joe, if something happens to me, check the release form for echo chamber. Kyle might try to forge your signature. Do not trust him. Save the condo." I filed something at the credit union, box 114. Key is under the third baseboard in the workshop. You know how to find it. I read it 3 times, my thumb tracing the indentation of the ballpoint pen in the paper. My hands weren't shaking. They were doing what David always told me to do in a crisis. They were getting steady. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family who betrays your trust should face legal consequences. The next morning, Kyle and Tanya arrived with a tote bag full of what they called transition documents. Tanya sat beside me on the couch, her voice sweet as a spardame, and explained that moving into their guest house would be the best thing for me. "You shouldn't be alone in this big place, Joe," she said. "We can look after you, and Kyle can manage your finances so you don't have to stress about all those numbers." Kyle slid a durable power of attorney across the coffee table, its pages already marked with little yellow signature flags. He talked fast, using phrases like asset protection, elder continuity plan, and streamlined beneficiary designation, which is what people say when they think you're too foggy to notice they're robbing you blind. The power of attorney would give him control over my bank accounts, my social security deposits, and the power to sell the condo without my further consent. Tanya patted my knee and said, "We just want what's best for you." I blinked slowly, let my hand tremble a bit as I reached for my reading glasses and said, "I'm just so tired, sweetheart. Can we talk about this in a day or 2? I can't think straight." I could see the flicker of triumph in Tanya's eyes. She squeezed my hand and said, "Of course. Take your time. You just need to rest. Grief affects cognitive function, we understand." They didn't push, and that was their mistake. Predators always underestimate the prey when the prey learns how to play dead. They moved me into their guest house that weekend, a detached 1-bedroom suite behind their main home in a gated community called Sonoran Heights. It had a kitchenette with granite countertops, a view of the pool's turquoise water, and a sliding glass door that led to a small patio. I packed 2 suitcases, a box of David's things, and the wooden toolbox, which I hid inside a laundry basket under a stack of towels. That first night in the guest house, I lay in the dark and listened to the pool filtration pump hum. It had a particular rhythm, a low-frequency drone that made the walls slightly vibrate. I had gone from being a homeowner to a guest in my own disaster, but I was playing a role, the confused, compliant widow whose faculties were fading just enough to be harmless. It was the safest role I could choose while I figured out exactly what David's warning meant. Within 2 days, I started hearing things. At first, it was just raised voices through the wall that separated the guest suite from the main house. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was sharp, edged with panic. Then, one afternoon when Tanya was out at a Botox appointment, I walked toward the kitchen to refill my water glass and heard Kyle on the phone in his home office, his voice tight and panicked. I stood just outside the door, not moving. "I told you the closing date has to hold. Oral text people are done with due diligence. If this thing doesn't fund by next week, the balloon payment comes due on the other note, and I'm completely underwater. I mean completely, as in bankruptcy filing underwater." He paused, then said, "No, the collateral release is already recorded." The notary backdated it, I told you. Just make sure the release of ownership is signed before closing, or the whole deal collapses and I'm on the hook for both notes. I heard him slam a drawer. I slipped back into the guest house, my heart thumping a fast, quiet rhythm. I knew what a balloon payment was from David's construction loans. I knew what a collateral release implied, and I knew the phrase, release of ownership, meant my 25% stake was the final speed bump in his scheme. David's note hadn't been paranoia. It was prophecy. Over the following week, I turned my guest suite into an observation post. I kept a log in a small spiral notebook, noting every time Kyle made a frantic phone call, every time a strange courier envelope arrived, every time Tanya came home with a shopping bag from a store I couldn't afford on an image consultant's income. I started a spreadsheet in my head. Tanya mentioned their monthly Escalade lease payment was $1,400, which, given the sticker price of about $90,000 and a residual value percentage, implied a money factor equivalent to an 18% annual interest rate. I'd learned to do those calculations backward from David's equipment leases. She also booked a consultation for a tummy tuck and a rhinoplasty with a surgeon on Wilshire Boulevard, procedures that together cost more than my first condo's down payment back in 1992. They were hemorrhaging cash, spending money that hadn't arrived yet, building a lifestyle on a foundation of future fraud. I needed to get inside that locked filing cabinet in Kyle's office. The home office was off the main hallway, always with the door ajar during the day because Kyle treated it like a command center. The filing cabinet was a 2-drawer vertical steel unit with a cam lock, the kind you can find in any big box office supply store for about $60. The lock was a standard 5-pin wafer tumbler, not high security by any stretch, but enough to keep out a casual snoop. Here's the thing. David had taught me to pick a basic pin tumbler lock back when we were renovating our first house, a little bungalow we stripped to the studs. We kept losing the keys to the built-in cabinets in the breakfast nook, and one Saturday afternoon he came home with a clear plastic practice lock from a locksmith supply shop. He said, "Joe, anyone who owns a home should know how to manipulate a lock in an emergency. It's just like feeling for calculus with your fingertips." I practiced until I could feel the subtle give of each pin set, the rotation of the plug when the shear line aligned. So on a Thursday morning when Kyle and Tanya both left for what they called a business lunch, but was actually a catering tasting for a future they'd never have, I went into the office with a paperclip and a bobby pin. I first checked the area for nanny cams or motion sensors. Clean. I straightened the large paperclip, then bent the last half-inch into a 90-degree angle to use as a tension wrench. The bobby pin I unbent and curved the end into a shallow hook, the simplest rake pattern you can get. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway and applied light clockwise torque, no more pressure than you'd use to hold a butterfly without crushing it. Then I slid the bobby pin rake all the way to the back of the cylinder and dragged it forward with a gentle upward lift, feeling the pins bump against the hook. The first pin clicked, then the second, a tiny metallic vibration transmitted through the steel. The third pin was stubborn, so I increased torque just a fraction, felt the tension wrench give slightly, and raked again. The fourth and fifth pins set almost simultaneously, and the plug rotated with that perfect little schlick sound. The cam tongue retracted, and the drawer slid open on oiled glides. Inside was a hanging file labeled Echo Chamber Studios Acquisition. I lifted it out, set it on the desk, and started photographing every page with my phone, making sure to get the edges of the paper for later forensic analysis. The top document was a release of collateral form issued by Desert Financial Bank, dated 4 months earlier, stamped as filed with the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. Purported to terminate my deed of trust on the condo, releasing the property from the liens securing the business loan. The borrower signature line showed my name, Joanna M. Hart, in what looked like my handwriting, notarized by one Rita Mendez, commission number AZ 874,123. Except I had never signed this document. I had never met Rita Mendez. I had never even heard of this release until David's note. I stared at the signature until my dental training kicked in. We used magnifying loops in the operatory, so I developed an eye for microscopic detail. I used the zoom on my phone's camera to magnify the ink. Under that magnification, the signature looked too uniform, too even, lacking the slight pressure variations and the distinctive drag marks of a ballpoint pen on paper. The loop of my capital J, which I always close with an upward flick learned from Catholic school penmanship, was a lazy oval instead. My real signature has a quick, slightly broken stroke at the top of the H in heart, but this was a smooth, continuous curve. This wasn't a freehand forgery. It was a scanned copy of my real signature from another document, digitally isolated, cleaned up, and printed onto the release form with a high-resolution laser printer. A composite forgery, what forensic document examiners call a cut-and-paste counterfeit. I'd read about the technique in an article about retirement account fraud in a dental trade magazine, of all places. The next document was an asset purchase agreement between Kyle Hart, listed as sole owner of Echo Chamber Studios LLC, and Oral Tech, a music tech company based in Austin that builds proprietary acoustic modeling software. The purchase price was $750,000, allocated across the studio's name and goodwill, the client list, the proprietary acoustic treatment designs Kyle had developed, and a detailed inventory of all recording equipment. The list included serial numbers for the Neve console, the U87 microphones, 3 vintage Shure SM57s, 2 Avalon preamps, all the outboard gear. The closing date was listed as November 16th, just 7 days away. Then I found the real smoking gun, a promissory note showing that Kyle had taken out a second business loan 18 months ago, a balloon mortgage-style note for $220,000 from a private lender called Canyon Road Capital, secured by the studio's equipment and future receivables. The balloon payment of the entire principal plus accrued interest was due 10 days after the Oral Tech closing. If the sale didn't fund in time, Canyon Road would repossess everything. The forged collateral release was his escape hatch. By pretending the condo was no longer in the picture, he could sell the assets, free and clear, to Oral Tech, pocket the cash, pay off Canyon Road, and leave me holding an unsecured deficiency that Desert Financial Bank would chase by foreclosing on the condo anyway, because the release was fraudulent and the bank would discover it the moment they couldn't find the lien. He was planning to make me the legal scapegoat for his own debt spiral, and he was willing to let me lose my home. I carefully replaced the file exactly as I found it, relocked the cabinet, and retreated to the guest house with my phone full of evidence. That night, I downloaded all the photos to a secure cloud storage account using a new Gmail I'd created for this purpose only, and I deleted the originals from my camera roll. I was not going to let a phone search undo everything, but I didn't stop there. I remembered David's note about the credit union box and the key under the third baseboard. The next morning, while Kyle and Tanya were at a business lunch that was actually a wine pairing tasting for their post-fraud celebration, I drove back to the condo. The familiar smell of the place hit me, a mixture of the beeswax polish I used on the oak floors and the faint trace of David's cigarillos. I went straight to the workshop, counted the baseboards along the north wall. The baseboards were 5-inch poplar with a cove molding profile, painted semi-gloss white. I pressed the lower edge of the third board from the corner, near an outlet. The whole bottom section popped loose on a hidden spring hinge David had installed. Behind it was a small magnetic key holder, the kind used for spare car keys, containing a brass safe deposit box key with a numbered tag. I drove to Desert Financial Credit Union, a branch on Shea Boulevard, and presented the key and my driver's license. The teller led me to the vault room. Box number 114 was on the third tier, requiring a small stepladder. Inside was a single manila envelope, sealed with red dental floss David had used as joke tape. I opened it with shaking but steady hands. The envelope held a copy of the original Echo Chamber loan documents, and clipped to the front page was a handwritten addendum on a separate sheet of paper, dated the same day as the loan signing, bearing Kyle's signature. It read, "I, Kyle Hart, acknowledge that Joanna Hart holds a 25% ownership stake in Echo Chamber Studios LLC, and no sale, transfer, or encumbrance of studio assets shall occur without her express written consent. This provision is irrevocable without her signature and is filed with the LLC operating agreement." Below it, David had written in blue ink, "Filed with Arizona Corporation Commission, recorded with loan docs at County Recorder, not revocable without her consent. Joe, this is your shield." He had structured it as a mandatory consent clause in the operating agreement, the kind of thing that makes any subsequent transfer without that consent void ab initio. My husband, the quiet architect, had built a legal firewall around me, and Kyle had walked right past it assuming I'd never find the match to light the signal fire. I needed an ally who could turn this from a family secret into an enforceable legal reality. The next day, I made a call from a prepaid burner phone I'd bought at a gas station. I called the lender who held the original business loan, Desert Financial Bank, and asked for their fraud investigation unit. After 3 transfers and 20 minutes on hold, I was connected to a senior analyst named Carmen Vargas. I introduced myself and gave her the short version: a forged collateral release, a pending asset sale to Oral Tech, a 25% ownership stake with an irrevocable consent clause, and a balloon note about to blow. She asked pointed questions: the notary's name, the date on the release, the Oral Tech closing date. She asked me to send the photos from a secure email, and I did. 30 minutes later, she called back, her voice clipped and professional, but with a current of anger underneath. Mrs. Hart, if these documents are authentic, your son has committed felony bank fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1344 and wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343. The release he recorded is void from the beginning because consent was never given, but the county record still shows the condo as unencumbered, which he used to represent clear title to Oral Tech. We need to catch him in the attempt before the funds transfer happens, because if the money moves, untangling it gets exponentially harder. Can you get him to bring you to the closing? I said I could. She told me she'd coordinate with the FBI's white-collar crime unit in Phoenix, because the interstate nature of the sale to an Austin buyer placed it squarely in federal jurisdiction. She said, "We'll have agents in the building. Just follow his script until the moment of signature, then refuse. We'll handle the rest." Then she asked, "Do you have an attorney?" I said not yet. She gave me the name of a woman named Ellen Rojas, a civil litigator who specialized in elder financial abuse cases, with a track record of clawing back assets. I called Ellen's office from the burner phone and set up a confidential consultation for the following afternoon. She agreed to take the case on a contingency basis, because the documentary evidence was so strong. There was one more piece of evidence to gather, and it involved the notary, Rita Mendez. Her name and commission number were on the forged release, so I found her business listing on a public notary directory site. I called her from the burner phone, using my calmest, most disarming dental hygienist voice. I told her I was a freelance reporter writing an investigative piece on notary fraud schemes targeting seniors, and that her name had come up in a record search. I asked very gently if she'd ever notarized a document without the signer physically present. There was a long pause, and then her voice, trembling, said, "Who is this? This isn't a reporter." I said nothing, just let the silence stretch. She broke. "Look, I did it a couple times for a friend's kid. He said his mom was out of town and needed the signature urgently. He paid me cash, $100 a pop. I didn't know it was anything bad. I backdated the journal entry like he asked. I asked, 'What was the name on the document?' She whispered, 'Hart, Joanna Hart. I never met her.' I'm so sorry." I recorded the entire call because Arizona is a one-party consent state, meaning only one party to the conversation needs to consent to recording. Later, Carmen's team obtained Rita Mendez's notary journal through a subpoena, and the journal entry for the release form matched. My name, a date, a thumbprint in the journal that was obviously not mine because it was an inkless print pad, and the ridges were too smooth. No scarring from the burn I got on my right thumb at age 12 from a glue gun. The forensic document examiner would later confirm that the thumbprint in the journal was Kyle's, because he'd accidentally used his own thumb while trying to fabricate the entry. Sloppy. The maximum cruelty beat arrived 4 days before the scheduled closing. I had been planning a test to see exactly how far Kyle and Tanya were willing to go, a moral stress test. I staged a medical episode. As a dental hygienist, I'd seen patients have syncope, vasovagal reactions, full-on seizures in the chair. I knew how to mimic the signs: sudden pallor, limp muscle tone, shallow irregular breathing. That evening, when they were both in the living room watching a reality real estate show about flipping homes, I walked in holding a manila folder that contained the fake release of ownership documents they'd been trying to get me to sign. The folder was a prop. I sat on the edge of an armchair, then I let my body go completely limp and slump sideways onto the plush carpet. I kept my breathing fast and shallow, my eyes mostly closed but with a sliver of vision, enough to see blurry shapes. My phone was recording audio in the chest pocket of my cardigan, microphone facing outward. I heard Tanya gasp, "Oh my God, is she okay?" Then Kyle's voice, flat and cold as a steel tray. "She's breathing, the folder. We need that signature before the ambulance comes if we can." I felt footsteps approach, the vibration of his weight on the floorboards. Tanya said, her voice thin, "Kyle, she's unconscious. We have to call 911. She could be having a stroke." Kyle knelt somewhere near my head, and I felt a tug at the folder in my loose hand. He pulled it free, and I heard pages rustle. "She hasn't signed it," he said, his voice tight with frustration, not concern. "The release of ownership. She was supposed to sign it today. If she's incapacitated, the power of attorney is useless because I never got her to sign it. This could push closing, Tanya, and if we don't close, the balloon note defaults. I lose the studio, I lose the Escalade, we lose this house." Tanya's tone shifted, went sharp and calculating. "So what do we do? Can you sign it for her? You have the scanned signature, just print it again and use a notary who won't ask questions." Kyle said, "It already has a notary block, Rita Mendez, but she's spooked. I need a wet signature. The buyer's legal team is going to scrutinize everything. We need Joanna alive and signing or a court-ordered guardianship, and that takes time we don't have." I heard him stand up. "Let's wait a few minutes. If she comes around, we'll get her to sign right then. I'll hold the pen in her hand if I have to. If not, we call 911 and then we figure out an emergency guardianship petition. I know a lawyer who can rush it. But I'm not touching her until that paper is wet." I lay there for 2 full minutes while they debated the quickest way to extract a signature from my possibly dying hand. Not once did either of them check my pulse, lift my legs, or put a pillow under my head. Not once did Tanya actually dial 911. When I finally stirred, let out a soft moan, and came to with a confused look, they were instantly all sympathy. Tanya stroked my hair and said, "You gave us such a scare, Joe. You're okay, you're okay." Kyle handed me a glass of water and said, "Maybe we should rest and revisit those papers when you're feeling stronger." I had the recording. The last drop of maternal instinct I'd been clinging to evaporated in that shallow carpet air. A mother knows her child, but I did not know this man. On the morning of November 16th, Kyle and Tanya told me we were going to the bank to finalize a few things for my estate planning. They dressed me in a nice silk blouse the color of champagne. Tanya even fixed my collar and smoothed my hair like I was a child headed to picture day. I carried my handbag, a structured leather tote, which held David's little black notebook, a copy of the operating agreement addendum, and the burner phone with Carmen's number on speed dial. In the Escalade, Kyle chatted nervously about how this meeting would secure all of our futures and finally put Mom's mind at ease. Tanya patted my knee. We pulled into the underground parking of a corporate tower on Camelback Road, the kind with polished granite floors and security turnstiles. The bank's business division had a conference room on the 7th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city. Oral Tech's acquisition team was there. A VP of corporate development named Marcus, their transaction attorney, a paralegal with a laptop, and a mobile notary they'd brought. The air smelled like expensive coffee and toner, and the faint floral scent of Tanya's perfume. Kyle spread documents across the polished conference table in neat stacks. The final piece was a single-page document titled Assignment of Ownership Interest, prepared by his attorney. It would transfer my 25% stake to Kyle for $1, voiding my consent right and allowing him to sign the Oral Tech deal as sole owner. He slid it toward me with a black Montblanc pen resting neatly on top, a gift he'd given David years ago. "Okay, Mom, just sign right there on the flagged line and we're all done. I'll take such good care of you. Everything will be secure just like you want." I picked up the pen. I looked at him, at the diamond stud that still wobbled just slightly at his too-fast pulse visible in his neck. I said very calmly, "You know, your father left me a note that said don't trust you with my signature, so I won't." I set the pen down exactly on its original spot. Kyle's face went through a cascade of micro-expressions. Confusion, irritation, a flash of anger, and then a dawn of pure, undiluted dread. At that exact moment, the conference room door opened and Carmen Vargas walked in, flanked by 2 FBI special agents in dark suits, a man and a woman. The woman held up a badge. "Kyle Hart, Tanya Hart, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, forgery, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. Please place your hands behind your back." Tanya shrieked, a high, thin sound that cut through the hum of the HVAC. Kyle tried to lunge and grab the assignment document off the table, maybe to tear it up, but the male agent caught his wrist and guided it into a wrist lock. The mobile notary stood up with her hands raised instinctively. The oral tech team exchanged looks of bewildered horror, and Marcus said, "What the hell is going on?" Carmen explained calmly that the sale was voided, the assets were encumbered by a prior ownership interest, and the funds would be frozen. The notary's stamp was seized. They handcuffed Kyle and Tanya and read them their rights as they were led out past a row of cubicles where bank employees stared in shock. The aftermath unspooled over the next year with the kind of methodical precision I'd normally reserve for scraping calculus off a molar. The FBI's forensic document examiner used a video spectral comparator, a machine that analyzes ink types and printing methods under different wavelengths of light. The machine showed definitively that the signature on the release form was printed with black toner, not written with any pen, and that the toner particles matched exactly the HP laser jet printer in Kyle's home office. The paper itself had telltale indentation marks from the original document he'd scanned my signature from, a Christmas card I'd sent 3 years earlier. Rita Mendez cooperated fully after her admission on the phone, signing an affidavit that laid out how Kyle paid her cash, how she backdated the journal, and how she'd done similar favors for him on 2 other documents related to his personal loan applications. The bank voided the fraudulent release and reinstated the deed of trust on my condo with a corrected recording. They agreed to restructure the original loan rather than foreclose, because my ownership stake and the irrevocable consent addendum meant I had a legal interest in keeping the studio's assets intact. Oral Tech pulled out of the sale immediately and filed a civil lawsuit against Kyle for misrepresentation and breach of contract, eventually winning a default judgment that will sit on his credit report like a scarlet letter until he's 100. Kyle was indicted on 2 counts of felony forgery, 1 count of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud against a financial institution. He took a plea deal to avoid federal prison time, instead getting 5 years of supervised probation, 100 hours of community service, and full restitution of $340,000 to me and the bank jointly. Tanya pleaded guilty to conspiracy and got 18 months of probation, and her image consulting business evaporated faster than cheap nail polish remover on a hot sidewalk. The court also ordered that all physical assets of Echo Chamber Studios not included in the voided sale, the Neve console, the outboard compressors, the microphones, the acoustic panels, the desk, the cables, everything, be transferred to me as full owner as part of the restitution. I took possession of the equipment and the lease on the industrial space where the studio operated. With Ellen Rojas's help, I filed a civil motion to garnish Kyle's wages, any legitimate wages he might earn, in perpetuity until the judgment is fully satisfied. And then I did something that gave me more peace than any therapy session could. I rebranded the studio. The new name is Treble Betrayal Studio, a pun on treble as in high frequencies and triple as in triple cross, which local musicians actually love because it sounds edgy and raw and honest. I had custom shirts printed in high-visibility neon pink, with bold black block lettering across the back. Off-key liar. The court's restitution order includes a provision that Kyle must accept and maintain any lawful employment that contributes to the payment of his debt. I offered him a job. He scrubs mixing boards with 99% isopropyl alcohol and a microfiber cloth, cleans the ISO booth glass until it's streak-free, wipes down patch bays, and takes out the trash. He wears that neon pink shirt every shift because the employee dress code requires a provided uniform. His hourly wage, after mandatory deductions and a garnishment order, goes straight into the restitution account. The garnishment is calculated at 25% of his disposable earnings, per Arizona law. He'll be scrubbing mixing boards until he's in his late 60s, if his knees and back hold out. The other engineers and session musicians know the story, and they tip him with single-dollar bills, which is entirely legal. David's quiet planning saved everything. He'd built a legal dead man's switch with that ownership addendum, a mechanism that only I could trigger by showing up and refusing to sign. He'd seen the cracks in our son's character before I ever did, and instead of agonizing over them, he built a load-bearing wall around me. I sometimes sit in the control room of Treble Betrayal Studio at night, listening to a young singer-songwriter record something raw and unpolished, and I think about all the micro-fractures I've learned to see in my life, in teeth, in documents, in people. The smallest cracks tell you where the break is going to happen. You just have to pay attention and refuse to be gaslit into thinking decay is the natural state of things. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. If you believe that family who betrays your trust should face concrete legal consequences, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll be back soon with another story.